Welcome back to the Umbara Project. Today we are looking at one of the most painful near misses in all of the Clone Wars. What if ARC Trooper 5s actually succeeded? Not what if he vaguely warned somebody that something was wrong, and not what if Rex simply believed him a little more than he did in canon, but what if 5s survived the warehouse on Coruscant, presented enough evidence to force the Jedi Council to investigate, and expose the inhibitor chips before Darth Sidious could use them to destroy the Jedi Order? This is one of those alternate timelines where a single blaster bolt changes almost everything, because 5s was not guessing. By the time Commander Fox entered that warehouse, 5s had already uncovered the existence of an organic implant inside every clone trooper, watched Tup die after that implant malfunctioned, removed the same structure from his own brain, seen Nala Se repeatedly obstruct an independent investigation, and heard enough from Chancellor Palpatine to understand that the conspiracy reached far beyond Kamino. He did not know the complete architecture of Order 66, and he did not know that Palpatine was Darth Sidious, but he was standing only a few steps away from the truth. All he needed was for the right people to stop treating him like a madman long enough to listen. To understand how enormous that change would be, we have to begin exactly where 5's story began to collapse. On Ringo Vinda, Clone Trooper Tup suddenly raised his weapon and murdered Jedi General Tippler in the middle of battle. There was no argument, no obvious betrayal, and no separatist mind control device attached to him. Tup simply looked at a Jedi and behaved as though some hidden command had taken control of his body. To the Republic, it looked like a catastrophic mental breakdown. To Count Dooku and Darth Sidious, it was a nightmare. The mechanism that had been designed to remain dormant until the end of the war had activated early, in public, with witnesses. The Sith immediately understood the danger because their victory depended on the clones appearing trustworthy until the exact second they were ordered to turn on the Jedi. If the Jedi learned that every clone carried a behavioral control mechanism capable of overriding years of loyalty, the entire foundation of the Grand Plan could collapse. That is why Tup's illness was never just a medical mystery. It was the first accidental crack in a conspiracy that had taken more than a decade to build. And 5s became dangerous because he refused to accept the explanation that everyone above him wanted to provide. 5s had already lived through enough of the war to distrust convenient orders. He had seen Domino Squad nearly fail because the Kaminoan system valued performance more than individuality. He had watched Heavy sacrifice himself on the Rishi Moon, fought beside Echo until Echo appeared to die at the Citadel, and survived Umbara, where General Pong Krell treated clones as disposable pieces and ordered 5s, and Jesse executed for disobeying him. That history matters because it explains why 5s does not simply salute when Nala Se says Tup must be terminated. He has learned that authority can be wrong, that clones can be used by people who do not see them as human beings, and that loyalty to the Republic does not mean surrendering the ability to think. On Kamino, with AZI-3 helping him, that stubbornness becomes the one thing Sidious cannot control. 5s pushes for a second opinion, discovers the organic construct in Tup's brain, and then risks having the same object removed from his own head, because he understands the obvious question. If Tup has one, and 5s has one, how many other clones have been altered in exactly the same way? The answer, of course, is all of them. That is the terrifying fact 5s uncovers before he ever returns to Coruscant. The implant is not a random tumor unique to Tup. It is part of the cloning process itself. Nala Se insists that Master Sifo Dyas ordered the chips as a safeguard, a means of restraining the clones' aggressive tendencies and ensuring their obedience if Jedi command structures ever failed. That explanation sounds plausible because the clones were designed as soldiers, and because the Republic already accepts that their biology has been engineered. But 5 sees too many contradictions. Tup's chip did not make him calmer. When it malfunctioned, it made him murder a Jedi. Nala Se does not behave like a physician trying to understand an unexpected defect. She behaves like someone protecting classified information. She wants Tup's body controlled, 5s silenced, the evidence contained, and the Jedi kept from examining the implant independently. Even Shaak Ti, who genuinely cares about the clones and resists Nala Se's treatment of them as property, does not yet understand what 5s has found. The conspiracy survives because each person has only one piece of it, and Palpatine makes sure those pieces never assemble in the same room. In canon, the final trap works almost perfectly. 5s is brought to Coruscant, isolated, drugged, manipulated, and given a private audience with Palpatine. Whatever exactly the Chancellor says to him in that room, Fives emerges convinced that Palpatine is involved in the plot, and then appears to attack him, which allows the entire investigation to be reframed around Fives' supposed instability. By the time Fives reaches the warehouse and contacts Rex and Anakin, he is exhausted, frightened, chemically compromised, hunted by Coruscant security, and desperately trying to explain a conspiracy so enormous that it sounds impossible. He places Rex and Anakin inside a ray shield because he no longer trusts anyone to remain long enough to hear him. That choice makes sense from Fives' perspective, but it also makes him look more dangerous. Then Fox arrives with clone shock troopers. Fives reaches for a weapon, Fox fires, and the one clone who came closest to exposing Order 66 dies in Rex's arms. His last words leave enough doubt inside Rex to matter later, but not enough to stop the Jedi Purge. Our timeline changes in the few seconds before that shot. Fives still contacts Anakin and Rex. He still uses the ray shield because he believes Palpatine can reach anyone. He still looks unstable, because he has spent days being lied to, drugged, chased, and told that the thing he physically removed from his skull is nothing to worry about. But Rex does something differently. Instead of focusing primarily on getting Fives to surrender, he recognizes the pattern in what his brother is saying. Rex has known Fives for years. He fought beside him on Umbara. He watched Fives risk execution rather than obey an order he knew would waste clone lives. He knows Fives can be reckless, but he also knows that Fives does not invent threats to his brothers. When Fives says every clone has something inside his head, Rex does not ask whether the claim sounds sane. He asks whether Fives can prove it. That question changes the tone inside the warehouse immediately. Fives produces the medical data he carried away from Kamino, including the scans showing the organic construct in Tup and in himself. He explains AZI-3's role and tells Rex that the droid can verify every procedure. He describes Nalasi's attempts to prevent the chip from being independently studied. Most importantly, he shows Anakin and Rex the removed implant itself. Sealed in the medical container he has guarded like the only piece of truth left in the galaxy. Anakin is not a doctor, but he does not need to be one to understand that Fives has moved beyond theory. There is an object that was surgically removed from a clone trooper's brain, records showing a nearly identical object inside Tup, and a direct connection between Tup's malfunction and the murder of a Jedi. Suddenly, Fives' wildest statement is no longer that there is a conspiracy. The wild statement would be pretending this evidence does not require an investigation. Commander Fox still arrives. His orders are still to arrest Fives, and Palpatine still wants the situation ended before the ARC trooper can speak to anyone with authority. But this time, Rex steps between Fives and the Coruscant Guard before anyone fires. Anakin backs him. That is the part Sidious did not plan for. Fox can shoot a fugitive reaching for a blaster. He cannot casually shoot Captain Rex and General Skywalker while they are standing in front of witnesses and demanding that the prisoner be taken alive. Fives, seeing that Rex finally believes there may be something real beneath his panic, keeps his hands away from the weapon. Anakin orders the ray shield lowered. Fox arrests Fives, but instead of a corpse leaving the warehouse, there is a living ARC trooper, a physical implant, and two of the most respected figures in the 501st insisting that the evidence be delivered directly to the Jedi Council. Palpatine now faces the first genuine emergency of his endgame. He can attempt to have Fives killed in custody, but that becomes far more difficult once Anakin personally assumes responsibility for transporting him. He can order Fox to classify the evidence, but Rex has already transmitted copies of the scans to secured 501st channels, and Anakin has contacted Obi-Wan. He can insist that Fives is mentally unstable, and that argument is still useful, but mental instability cannot explain why two separate clones carried matching organic devices in their brains. The Chancellor's greatest strength has always been controlling context. He can make the Jedi interpret every event inside a frame he has prepared for them. Fives has now forced a piece of evidence into the open that does not fit the frame, and once Anakin Skywalker begins asking why someone secretly implanted control mechanisms in his soldiers, Palpatine can no longer count on the investigation quietly disappearing. The Jedi Council's first reaction would not be instant certainty. That is important. Mace Windu, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, Shaak Tai, and the other masters have spent years fighting beside clone troopers. They have watched those soldiers save Jedi lives, sacrifice themselves for civilians, and demonstrate personalities far beyond the obedient products the Kaminoans originally promised. The idea that the entire army contains a hidden mechanism capable of forcing behavioral change would be horrifying. But the Council has also spent years surrounded by separatist plots, biological weapons, mind control technologies, and false intelligence. They would not leap from Fives found an implant to the Chancellor is a Sith Lord planning genocide. Their first responsibility would be verification, and that cautious instinct, for once, would work in their favor. Shakti becomes one of the most important people in the room because she can confirm much of Fives' account. She was on Kamino. She witnessed Nala Se's resistance to Fives' investigation. She knows the Kaminoans presented the chip as part of Sifo-Dyas's original specifications. She also knows that Fives' behavior changed after his own chip was removed and after he was subjected to medical treatment on Coruscant. What she does not know is why Nala Se fought so hard to control the evidence. When Fives claims he was drugged, Shakti cannot dismiss it, because she has already seen the Kaminoan doctor treat clones as engineered property rather than autonomous people. Plo Koon, who has repeatedly shown unusual compassion toward clones, would support a genuinely independent examination. Obi-Wan would want to know whether the implant could have been compromised by the Separatists. Mace would immediately see the military implications. Yoda would see something deeper. The Jedi have accepted an army they did not create, ordered by a dead Jedi under mysterious circumstances, and now that army contains a secret none of them were told about. The Council decides that the investigation cannot be conducted through Kamino. That is the first truly fatal blow to Sidious's cover-up. If they simply send Fives back to Nala Se, the evidence can still be controlled. Instead, they place Fives under Jedi protection inside a secure medical wing connected to the temple and bring in physicians with no relationship to the cloning program. AZI-3 is quietly requisitioned from Kamino, officially for testimony concerning Tup's autopsy. Rex volunteers for the first independent scan. Anakin insists on being present. The examination finds exactly what Fives said it would find: a tiny organic construct integrated into Rex's brain in the same location, with the same broad biological characteristics as the structures extracted from Tup and Fives. Rex has shown no symptoms. He is healthy. He is loyal. That makes the result worse, not better, because it proves the chip is standard. The Jedi then test a second clone, chosen without Kaminoan notice, then a third, then a fourth. The Council deliberately avoids selecting only men from the 501st because they need to eliminate the possibility that one battalion was altered. A Coruscant Guard trooper is scanned, the chip is there. A member of the 212th is scanned, the chip is there. A clone pilot is scanned, the chip is there. A veteran from another corps is scanned, the chip is there. Within hours, the investigation has moved from one ARC trooper's accusation to a statistically undeniable fact. The Grand Army of the Republic contains a biological implant that the Jedi commanders were never told existed. The question is no longer whether Fives is telling the truth. The question is what the implant is designed to do, who ordered it, and why the people responsible were willing to kill Tup and silence Fives, rather than let anyone find out. Rex asks for his chip to be removed. The Council hesitates because no one yet knows whether the procedure has long-term effects, and Nala Se has deliberately encouraged the idea that chip removal could destabilize clone behavior. Fives himself has been presented as evidence of that danger, but independent toxicology reveals traces of the drugs administered to Fives, undermining the claim that his paranoia was a natural consequence of surgery. AZI-3's records demonstrate that Fives did not become violently unstable on Kamino after removal. Much of his deterioration happened after he was isolated and medicated under the authority of people now implicated in concealing the implant. That does not prove every accusation Fives made, but it destroys the simplest defense. Rex undergoes the surgery under independent supervision. He wakes as himself. No homicidal aggression, no collapse of discipline, no neurological catastrophe. Just Rex, furious that someone placed a command device in his head before he was old enough to understand what command meant. Once Rex comes through the procedure, the Council expands the test. Cody is summoned under the pretext of a strategic debriefing with Obi-Wan. Wolf is brought in through Plo Koon. Bly is examined through Isla Secura's command structure. Other senior commanders are selected because they give the Jedi a cross-section of the army, and because removing their chips first protects the officers most capable of preserving order if the conspiracy becomes violent. Every scan returns the same answer. Some of the men react with disbelief. Some react with anger. Cody, who has built his identity around discipline and duty, is shaken by the implication that his loyalty can be mechanically overridden. Wolf, already scarred by the war and intensely protective of his men, wants to know who authorized it. Bly understands immediately what this means for Ayla. Rex says the thing they are all thinking. If the chip is harmless, why was it hidden? That question reaches far beyond medicine. The Jedi ask their analysts to reconstruct the clone army's origin from the beginning. Master Sifo Dyas commissioned the army years before the Clone Wars, convinced that the Republic would face a great conflict. He died under mysterious circumstances. The template for the army was Jango Fett, who told Obi-Wan on Kamino that he had been recruited by a man named Tyrannus. The Jedi have never been comfortable with those facts, but the emergency of Geonosis forced them to use the army before the mystery was solved. For 3 years, the war itself kept pushing the unanswered questions farther into the background. Now Fives has turned those old contradictions into evidence of an active conspiracy. If the man who recruited Jango was connected to the hidden implants, and if the chips were designed to alter clone behavior, then the mystery of Sifo Dyas is no longer ancient history. It is a weapon pointed at the Jedi in the present. The Council does not yet know that Tyrannus is Count Dooku. In the canon timeline, that revelation comes later, during the investigation into Sifo Dyas' death. That chronological detail is crucial because it prevents this alternate history from becoming too easy. Fives has not walked into the temple carrying a datapad labeled Palpatine is Darth Sidious. The Jedi still have to investigate. Sidious still has layers of intermediaries protecting him. Dooku still understands how to erase witnesses. The Kaminoans can still claim they followed legitimate instructions from Sifo Dyas, but the Jedi now have something they did not possess in canon: urgency. Instead of treating the Sifo Dyas mystery as one unresolved thread among thousands, they understand that it is directly connected to the brains of every soldier under their command. That urgency changes the fate of Tup's records as well. Fives insists that the Council preserve every piece of medical information from Kamino, including communications traffic surrounding Tup's diagnosis. Republic intelligence begins tracing who contacted the Kaminoans once Tup killed Tippler. Encryption hides much of the traffic, but patterns emerge. Nala Se communicated with Lama Su. Kaminoan leadership took actions inconsistent with a routine medical investigation. Sensitive messages moved through channels associated with parties outside ordinary Republic medical command. None of that is enough to identify Dooku, but it gives the Council probable cause to treat Kamino as a compromised military contractor rather than an unquestioned partner. For the first time since the war began, the Jedi start looking at their own army as a potential battlefield. The clones themselves become part of the secrecy problem. There are millions of them, spread across countless fronts, ships, hospitals, training centers, and staging grounds. The Jedi cannot simply announce over the holonet that every clone has a control chip and order everyone into surgery. Doing so could panic the army, alert the separatists, trigger whatever contingency the chips are designed to execute, and hand Palpatine a political weapon by making the Jedi appear to be sabotaging the Republic's military during wartime. So the Council creates a compartmentalized program. Officially, it is a neurological screening initiative prompted by Tup's death. Unofficially, selected Jedi generals are told the truth and instructed to identify medical personnel they trust personally. Senior clone officers are screened first, then medics, communication specialists, pilots, ship commanders, and units stationed near major Jedi concentrations. The goal is not immediate universal surgery. The goal is to create pockets of uncontaminated command before whoever built the chips realizes the Jedi know. Fives becomes central to that effort, though not in the way he imagined. He wants to tell every brother in the army immediately. Rex understands the impulse, but he also understands military communications. If the enemy designed the chips, The enemy may have monitoring systems built around the same command architecture. One careless transmission could reveal everything. The irony is painful. After nearly dying because no one listened to him, Fives now has to keep the truth secret from the men he was trying to save. Rex is the one who convinces him. They cannot save the clones by creating a panic that gets half the army killed. They need evidence strong enough that no politician, Kaminoan, or military bureaucrat can bury it. For the first time since Tup's death, Fives is no longer alone. He does not have to carry the whole conspiracy in his head. He has Rex beside him, Anakin demanding answers, and the Jedi Council treating his warning as intelligence rather than insanity. Anakin's involvement creates a new danger for Sidious because Anakin knows Palpatine personally. In canon, that friendship is one of the Chancellor's greatest assets. Palpatine has spent years presenting himself as the one authority figure who trusts Anakin without reservation, especially when the Jedi Council frustrates him. But the Fives investigation reverses that emotional geometry. Anakin brought Fives to the Council. The Council listened. Rex was protected. Independent doctors proved Fives right. Instead of experiencing another example of the Jedi dismissing people he cares about, Anakin watches the Order admit that a clone trooper may have uncovered something they missed. That does not erase Anakin's resentment toward the Council, nor does it fix his fear of loss, his secret marriage, or his attachment to Palpatine. What it does is create one powerful memory in which trusting his soldiers and challenging official authority leads the Jedi toward the truth rather than away from it. Palpatine recognizes that immediately. He cannot openly oppose medical screening without drawing attention to himself, so he does what Sidious always does when a plan becomes unstable. He changes the argument. Through the Senate and military bureaucracy, concerns begin circulating about Jedi interference in clone readiness. Senators loyal to the Chancellor question whether commanders should be authorizing invasive procedures during an active war. Kaminoan representatives warned that unauthorized removal of developmental implants could compromise conditioning, coordination, and long-term neurological stability. Palpatine publicly takes a measured position, saying the safety of the troops must come first, while quietly ensuring every delay gives him time. He wants the Jedi trapped between urgency and legitimacy. If they move too slowly, the chips remain. If they move too aggressively, he can accuse them of seizing control of the army. But Fives has changed the political terrain in a way Palpatine cannot completely reverse. There is now physical evidence that the Senate never knowingly authorized. Padme Amidala becomes one of the first senators Anakin quietly consults, because this is exactly the kind of secret wartime power she has spent years warning about. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma would be natural allies once the information is shared with a tightly controlled circle. They do not need to know every Jedi suspicion to understand the constitutional problem. Millions of Republic soldiers have been biologically programmed with undisclosed devices capable of affecting behavior. If that program was concealed from the Senate, then someone has built an army with a secret command layer outside lawful oversight. Padme's instinct is not simply to expose it immediately. She knows premature disclosure could let the guilty parties destroy evidence. Instead, she begins quietly tracing appropriations, procurement authority, and emergency powers connected to Kamino. Meanwhile, the Jedi send a small investigative team back to Kamino with authority that Nala Se cannot easily refuse. Shaak Ti returns, but this time she is not alone, and she is not relying on Kaminoan laboratories to interpret Kaminoan evidence. Republic forensic specialists copy cloning records. Jedi technicians isolate communications archives. AZI-3's memory is secured before anyone can wipe it. Lama Su is informed that the Council is conducting a military security review after discovering undisclosed organic implants in Republic personnel. His response is careful. He insists the chips were part of the original specifications and were intended to ensure the clones remained controllable. He repeats the connection to Sifo Dyas. On the surface, it is the same defense Nala Se used. The problem is that independent testing has now shown the implants can compel a clone to murder a Jedi. When the Jedi ask whether the chip contains specific orders, the Kaminoans become evasive. That is where the cover-up begins to crack. A generic inhibitor designed to reduce aggression would not need the kind of hidden command response Tup demonstrated. The Jedi medical team starts mapping the chip's interaction with the clone nervous system. They cannot simply read Order 66 written inside organic tissue. but they can identify that the construct interfaces with decision-making and obedience pathways. It is designed to override volition under particular stimulus conditions. That is enough. Even if the Council does not yet know the exact activation phrase, they now know the army contains a remote behavioral override. Mace Windu does not need further proof to classify the clones as compromised. The Council's next debate is brutal because the war has not stopped. Dooku is still attacking Republic worlds. Grievous still commands enormous droid forces. The Separatists do not become harmless because the Jedi discover a Sith conspiracy. If the Republic withdraws every clone from combat for surgery, whole sectors could fall. If the Jedi keep fighting beside chipped clones, every battlefield remains a potential execution chamber. Yoda argues that they must protect the men without abandoning the civilians depending on them. Mace argues that the security threat is immediate. Obi-Wan points out that the Separatists may already know more than the Jedi, because Tup's malfunction occurred in front of enemy forces, and Dooku's intelligence network reacted quickly. Anakin wants the chips removed as fast as physically possible. Fives, unsurprisingly, agrees with Anakin. Rex takes the harder position: remove them in layers, preserve combat readiness, and make sure the first clones freed are the ones positioned to stop compromised units if the command is triggered early. That plan leads to one of the most extraordinary developments in the Clone Wars. A secret network of clone officers begins working with the Jedi to liberate their own army from hidden programming. Rex, Cody, Wolf, Bly, and other trusted commanders undergo removal and then return to duty. They are not told every detail of the Council's investigation, but they know enough. They identify medics who can be trusted. They schedule neurological resilience checks for battalions rotating off the front. Troopers are told that Tup's condition revealed a possible congenital defect and that new procedures can remove the risk. For many clones, that explanation is not even a lie. The exact conspiracy remains classified, but the medical danger is real. Thousands of chips begin disappearing without the wider Republic understanding what is happening. The psychological effect on the clones may be even more important than the surgical one. For the first time, senior Jedi are forced to confront the fact that the men under their command were denied a fundamental choice before birth. The clone army has always existed inside a moral contradiction. The Republic calls itself democratic while fielding soldiers bred for obedience, accelerated into adulthood, and sent to war without meaningful consent. Individual Jedi often care deeply for their troops, but the institution still benefits from that system. Five's discovery makes the contradiction impossible to ignore. The chips are not just a Sith weapon. They are the ultimate expression of what happens when the clones are treated as equipment. Rex tells the Council plainly that if the chips can take away a man's decision to fire, then every clone deserves to know they exist. Yoda cannot disagree. That conversation changes the relationship between Jedi and clones before Order 66 ever arrives. Units whose chips have been removed are told more of the truth. Some are furious. Some fear that without the implant they may somehow become less stable. Others ask whether every order they have ever followed was really their own, and Jedi healers have to explain that the chip was dormant rather than constantly controlling them. Men who spent their entire lives proud of their discipline suddenly have to separate genuine loyalty from manufactured obedience. The important result is that they choose the Jedi again. Cody returns to Obi-Wan's side because he wants to. Bly remains with Ayla because the bond they built in battle is real. Wolf follows Plo Koon because Plo treated him as a person long before anyone knew what was hidden in his skull. Rex's loyalty to Anakin and Ahsoka is no longer something Kamino can claim as programming. It is his own. Sidious cannot allow that process to continue for long. Every removed chip is one fewer weapon in his hand, but the deeper problem is informational. Once enough commanders know there is a hidden override, the secret can survive even if Fives dies. Killing one clone no longer solves anything. Destroying AZI-3 no longer solves anything. Silencing Nalasi no longer solves anything. Copies of the medical data now exist in Jedi archives, clone command channels, and Senate offices controlled by people Palpatine does not completely own. The conspiracy has crossed the threshold from a secret that can be buried to a fact that can only be explained. Sidious has to decide whether to accelerate his endgame before he is ready, or attempt to poison the investigation from within. His first move is to use Dooku. the Separatists intensify offensives in sectors commanded by Jedi known to be participating in the screening program. The goal is simple: keep the Jedi moving, keep clone units in combat, and make mass medical rotations appear impossible. Grievous launches attacks that force Republic fleets to redeploy. Supply lines are hit, medical stations are targeted. If the Jedi want to pull battalions away from active fronts, they must accept the loss of worlds. It is exactly the kind of impossible choice Sidious has engineered throughout the war. But this time, the Jedi understand that the tempo itself may be part of the conspiracy. Rather than allowing every attack to dictate their decisions, they begin assigning chip-cleared clone officers to coordinate defensive operations while unexamined units are rotated through secure facilities in smaller numbers. Dooku also receives a more disturbing order: erase every surviving link between Tyrannus and the creation of the clone army. In canon, Sidious eventually sends Dooku to clean up the Sifo Dyas trail when Plo Koon's discovery leads the Jedi toward the truth. Here that cleanup begins earlier and under far greater pressure. Financial intermediaries disappear. Old Kaminoan files are altered. Separatist agents hunt former couriers and contractors who might remember Jango Fett's recruitment. The Pikes are warned that certain transactions from before the war must never be discussed. Silman, the former aide to Valorum who survived the mission on which Sifo Dyas died, becomes an even more valuable loose end. The Sith are suddenly trying to erase a decade of history, while the Jedi are actively reconstructing it. And that collision creates something Palpatine has avoided for years: visible movement. Republic intelligence notices that people connected to Sifo Dyas are dying after the Jedi begin asking about the chips. That does not tell them who is responsible, but it tells them the old mystery is alive. Obi-Wan becomes convinced that Jango Fett's mysterious recruiter, Tyrannus, must be identified. Anakin points out that Jango served as the genetic template for the clones, and then fought beside Dooku on Geonosis. That relationship was always suspicious. Now it is impossible to ignore. Mace authorizes a dedicated investigation independent of the normal wartime intelligence apparatus, because the Council no longer trusts any chain of command that ultimately reports to the Chancellor. Yoda approves the decision with visible reluctance. The Jedi are now effectively conducting a counterintelligence operation inside the Republic they are sworn to defend. That is the beginning of the Shadow Cold War between the Jedi Council and Palpatine. Publicly, nothing changes. Jedi still attend strategic conferences in the Chancellor's office. Anakin still speaks with Palpatine. Mace still gives military updates. Senators still debate appropriations, while clone cruisers depart Coruscant every day. Privately, almost every interaction becomes a test. The Jedi stop sharing the full scope of the chip removal program. Palpatine notices that certain commanders disappear from duty for short medical rotations. The Council notices that the Chancellor asks unusually specific questions about clone neurological screening. Neither side can openly accuse the other without triggering a constitutional crisis. Sidious knows the Jedi are moving toward him. The Jedi know someone at the highest level of the war has reason to fear their investigation. What they do not yet know is that the man smiling across the conference table is the architect of the entire thing. Fives becomes both witness and target. The Council places him under protection, but keeping an ARC trooper hidden inside the Jedi Temple indefinitely is impossible. He wants to return to duty, and in some ways that is the safest place for him, because the 501st is filled with men loyal to Rex and Anakin. Palpatine cannot simply have him arrested again without explaining why. So Fives is formally cleared of the attack on the Chancellor pending an investigation into medical tampering. That public wording is cautious, but the effect among the clones is explosive. Rumors spread that Fives was right about TUP. Men at 79s whisper about secret implants. Clone medics start requesting access to neurological scans. The Council's carefully controlled program begins growing from the bottom up because the clones themselves want answers. Kix becomes especially important. As a medic in the 501st, he has the training to understand the evidence and the personal trust of the men around him. In the canon timeline, Kix eventually becomes suspicious of the conspiracy surrounding the clones as well. In this version, he does not have to start from nothing. Fives shows him the scans. Rex shows him the surgical records. Kix helps standardize a removal protocol that can be performed aboard Venators and major field hospitals without depending on Kamino. That logistical breakthrough is enormous. The Jedi no longer need to send every clone to a handful of secure facilities. Medical droids can be reprogrammed, surgeons trained, and units processed during normal maintenance cycles. What began as a secret emergency operation starts becoming a genuine army-wide liberation campaign. The Kaminoans realize they are losing control of their product. Lama Su protests that unauthorized procedures violate the Republic's cloning contract. Nala Se insists that removal could damage conditioning and lead to unpredictable aggression. Those arguments now sound increasingly self-incriminating. If the chip merely suppresses dangerous impulses, why does removing it leave Rex, Fives, Cody, and dozens of other clones unchanged? If the procedure is so dangerous, why did the Kaminoans never tell Jedi commanders that such a critical structure existed? If Sifo Dyas authorized it, where is the documentation? The Jedi request the original specifications. Kamino produces records, but forensic comparison reveals revisions and access gaps. Someone has been protecting sections of the program under security classifications that do not correspond cleanly to Jedi or Senate authority. Shakti confronts Nala Se directly. She does not accuse her of serving the Sith because she cannot yet prove it. She asks a simpler question: who did the Kaminoans believe Tyrannus was? Nala Se attempts to redirect towards Sifo Dyas, but the name matters. Jango Fett used it. The clone program contains hidden elements guarded by people who communicated with someone outside the Jedi Order. The more Nala Se resists, the more the Council understands that the Kaminoans did not merely follow an old Jedi request. They maintained an ongoing secret relationship. Lama Su is more pragmatic. He sees that the Republic may cancel contracts or seize the cloning facilities if the Kaminoans are found to have installed undisclosed control mechanisms in military personnel. Under pressure, he concedes that instructions concerning behavioral safeguards came through channels associated with Tyrannus after Sifo Dyas initiated the project. That confession does not immediately identify Dooku, but it destroys the official story. The chips were not simply an ancient precaution left behind by Sifo Dyas. They were maintained under the influence of the same mysterious figure who recruited Jango Fett. The Jedi now have a direct chain. Sifo Dyas orders an army, Sifo Dyas dies. Tyrannus recruits the template, Tyrannus remains involved with hidden behavioral programming, and the resulting army ends up fighting a war against Count Dooku. Obi-Wan states the implication no one wants to say aloud. The clone army may have been designed by the enemy. If that is true, then the entire Clone Wars could be a constructed conflict rather than a war the Sith merely exploited. Yoda feels the weight of that possibility more than anyone. For years, the Jedi have known the dark side surrounds the Chancellor and clouds their vision, but they have interpreted that darkness as evidence that the Sith are hiding somewhere within the chaos of war. Now the structure looks different. Perhaps the war itself is the hiding place. The Jedi were drawn into command of an army built through Sith influence. Their ability to sense the future diminished as the conflict deepened. Public trust in the Order has eroded as Jedi became generals. Emergency powers have accumulated around Palpatine. Every apparent victory has strengthened the central government. Five's chip is a physical object small enough to fit in a medical container, but it gives the Council a way to see the shape of the trap surrounding them. Plo Koon's investigation into Sifo Dyas accelerates. Whether his discovery of Sifo Dyas' lightsaber occurs at exactly the same moment as in canon, or is prompted earlier by the Council's renewed search, the result is the same. The Jedi gain a lead to Obadiah and the Pike Syndicate. This time they arrive already expecting the Sifo Dyas case to connect to the clone conspiracy. The Pikes are not treated merely as criminals with information about an old murder. They are witnesses in an active plot against the Republic. Security around the mission is tighter. Records are duplicated the moment they are recovered. Obi-Wan and Anakin understand that anyone who can connect Tyrannus to Sifo Dyas may be targeted. The trail leads to Silman, whose survival is one of the strangest accidents in the entire conspiracy. Once an aide to Chancellor Valorum, Silman had been aboard the mission connected to Sifo Dyas' death, and then spent years as a prisoner of the Pikes. In canon, Dooku reaches him before he can reveal everything. In this timeline, the Jedi know in advance that the witness may be the target of the same people trying to erase the chip investigation. Obi-Wan insists on moving Silman immediately, rather than conducting a long interrogation in a vulnerable location. Dooku still attacks because Sidious cannot allow Silman to reach Coruscant. The confrontation is violent, but the Jedi's preparation changes what information survives. Even if Dooku kills Silman, he cannot erase the Pike's records or the testimony already transmitted off-world. Then comes the revelation that transforms suspicion into certainty. Tyrannus is Dooku. The Jedi finally connect the Sith Lord commanding the Separatist movement to the man who helped arrange the clone army fighting against him. In canon, this discovery horrifies them, but by then, they are so deep in the war that they feel unable to change course. Here, Fives has already shown them what the hidden purpose of that army may be. Dooku did not merely help create the Republic's soldiers. He helped create soldiers containing secret behavioral overrides that can compel them to kill Jedi. There is no innocent interpretation left. The Sith have placed a weapon inside every clone, and the Jedi are the obvious intended target. Mace Windu orders the investigation compartmentalized even further, not because he distrusts the clones whose chips are removed, but because he now knows the Sith conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of both armies. Dooku controls the Separatists. Someone inside the Republic must have protected the clone program for years. The Council begins reviewing every decision that kept the origin of the army from being properly investigated. Who had authority to suppress questions? Who benefited from emergency powers? Who could issue military commands to every clone simultaneously? The answer to the last question is deeply uncomfortable. The office of the Supreme Chancellor sits at the top of the Republic's wartime command structure. That still does not prove Palpatine is a Sith. A lawful head of state would naturally possess command authority over the military. Sidious designed the system precisely so that ordinary constitutional structures could carry his hidden weapon. But once the Jedi know the chips respond to specific obedience protocols, they can begin examining how those protocols would be activated. Technicians compare Kaminoan command architecture with Republic military authorization systems. They discover that the chip does not function like a simple personality regulator. It is receptive to command triggers tied to emergency order structures. The clones were trained on contingency orders, and the organic implant ensures that certain commands cannot be refused. Somewhere in the enormous set of Republic security directives lies the mechanism Tup accidentally activated. Fives remembers Tup's words. He remembers the fixation on Jedi. He remembers that Tup did not attack random soldiers or civilians. The target was a Jedi general. That narrows the search. Rex and Kix begin reviewing contingency orders dealing with Jedi insurrection. The Republic has protocols for almost every catastrophic scenario. Rogue senators, military coups, compromised commanders, separatist infiltrators, and Jedi acting against the government. Most are bureaucratic plans no one expects to use. One of them, buried among emergency directives, authorizes clone forces to act against Jedi leadership under specific conditions. The exact wording is less important than what the chip does with it. When the command is delivered through the proper authority, the clone does not evaluate whether his general is actually a traitor. The implant converts the order into compulsion. The room goes silent when the Jedi understand that. Order 66 is no longer a hypothetical number hidden in a manual. It is an extermination mechanism. The Sith arranged for the Republic's own soldiers to stand beside the Jedi for years, earn their trust, learn their habits, protect them in battle, and then become executioners the moment a lawful command reached them. Tup's malfunction was a premature activation of that logic. The fact that the Order exists in Republic records gives Sidious legal camouflage. The fact that Tyrannus helped build the army gives it Sith purpose. And the fact that the Supreme Chancellor can issue emergency military orders puts Palpatine uncomfortably close to the trigger. Fives does not celebrate being proven right. The truth is worse than anything he imagined in the warehouse. He thought there was a plot to use the clones for something terrible. Now he learns that every friendship between clone and Jedi has been weaponized. He thinks of Tup apologizing without understanding what he had done. Rex thinks of Anakin. Cody thinks of Obi-Wan. Bly thinks of Ayla. The clones know how close they have been standing to their generals on every battlefield. They understand that if the command had been activated before the chips were discovered, most Jedi would never have had time to defend themselves. The clones would have murdered people they respected, and then been forced to live with whatever remained of themselves afterward, assuming the programming even allowed guilt to surface. This is the moment the chip removal campaign stops being a cautious pilot program and becomes an emergency. The Council authorizes removal for every clone unit it can reach without alerting the entire political system. Medical ships are reassigned. Temple technicians produce encrypted instructions for field medics. Kix and AZI-3 help develop diagnostic markers so surgeons can confirm successful extraction. High-ranking commanders are ordered to establish secure rosters of cleared personnel. The process is still physically impossible to complete overnight, but the numbers rise rapidly. Tens of thousands become hundreds of thousands. The Republic has built a vast medical infrastructure to sustain a galactic war, and the Jedi turn that infrastructure against the hidden weapon inside their own army. The clones themselves accelerate the process. Once enough men know, secrecy becomes less about hiding the truth from clones and more about hiding the scale of the response from Palpatine. Troopers volunteer between deployments. Some units begin removing chips aboard ships without filing the procedures through central medical databases. Clone commanders alter readiness reports to disguise recovery time. Quartermasters move surgical supplies under routine requisitions. For once, the uniformity of the Grand Army works against its creators. A procedure developed for one clone can be standardized rapidly across genetically identical soldiers. What the Kaminoans designed for efficiency becomes the mechanism by which their hidden control is dismantled. There are risks. Not every operation is perfect. Some clones experience complications. Some medical droids refuse unauthorized procedures until their programming is overridden. Officers loyal to strict regulations object before they understand the evidence. Coruscant Guard units are especially difficult because they operate close to Palpatine's office, and under command structures the Jedi cannot freely penetrate. The Guard includes men like Fox, who are not evil, but are deeply embedded in institutional obedience. The Council cannot simply storm their barracks and begin surgery without exposing the entire operation. That creates dangerous islands of chipped soldiers at the heart of the capital, even while frontline legions become increasingly free. Sidious sees the pattern. Reports from military administration show strange medical consumption. Units associated with certain Jedi display unusual downtime. Kamino complains about procedures outside its supervision. The Chancellor does not know exactly how many chips have been removed, but he knows enough. Order 66 is decaying as a weapon. Every day he waits, more clones become capable of refusing it. Yet triggering the order now would reveal him before the Jedi are sufficiently weakened and before the political conditions are ready for the Empire. He has not secured Anakin. Grievous is still alive. Dooku is still useful. The Separatist leadership has not been gathered for execution. The Senate has not been prepared to accept a transformation of the Republic as the necessary response to a Jedi coup. Sidious built his victory around timing, and Fives has stolen that timing from him. He considers issuing Order 66 prematurely anyway. From a purely military perspective, the earlier command would still kill many Jedi. Millions of clones remain chipped. Surprise would still exist in units that have not been warned. But the result would be chaos rather than extermination. Chip-free commanders could countermand attacks, physically restrain affected troopers, warn neighboring Jedi, and broadcast proof that the command is a programmed compulsion. Jedi on Coruscant would immediately know the Chancellor had activated the hidden protocol they were investigating. Instead of walking into a temple defended by clones under Sidious control, Anakin might be standing beside Mace Windu when the alarm sounds. An early Order 66 could turn the entire Grand Army into a civil war, and expose Palpatine as the source, before he had transformed himself into Emperor. So Sidious chooses deception over activation. He tells Dooku to intensify the war and begins constructing a political narrative in which the Jedi are secretly tampering with the army. Loyal senators raise questions about clone surgeries. Holonet commentators report rumors of military medical scandals. Palpatine privately warns Anakin that some council members may be using the Tup incident to increase Jedi control over Republic forces. It is a familiar tactic. Separate Anakin from the institution by making him feel the Council fears and excludes him, but it works less effectively now because Anakin has personally watched the evidence accumulate. He saw Fives chip. He watched Rex undergo surgery. He knows Dooku is tyrannous. When Palpatine suggests the Jedi are overreacting, Anakin does something canon Anakin rarely does with his mentor. He withholds information and watches the Chancellor's reaction. That moment is subtle, but it is disastrous for Sidious. Anakin has always been emotionally perceptive, even when he is politically naive. He notices Palpatine knows details he should not know. The Chancellor refers to aspects of the investigation that were never presented to the Senate. He speaks too confidently about the chip's supposed purpose. Anakin does not immediately conclude that Palpatine is Darth Sidious, because that leap is almost unthinkable. But for the first time, he allows himself to consider that Palpatine may be part of the cover-up. The friendship remains, yet a layer of suspicion enters it. Sidious can no longer manipulate Anakin in a completely private emotional space. Obi-Wan notices the change. Rather than dismissing Anakin's concern or reminding him to obey the Council, he encourages him to trust his instincts but not act alone. Their relationship benefits from the fact that the investigation gives them a common problem. Obi-Wan is not hiding the most important information from Anakin. Anakin is part of the inner group because of his connection to Fives and Rex. That reduces one of the resentments Sidious later exploits when the Council asks Anakin to spy on the Chancellor. Here, Anakin is already voluntarily observing Palpatine because he understands there may be a traitor inside the Republic. He does not feel used in quite the same way. He feels responsible. Ahsoka's absence still hurts him. She has already left the Jedi Order by this point in the war, and Fives surviving does not undo the trial that drove her away. That is important, because this timeline should not magically heal every wound in Anakin's life. He still believes the Council failed Ahsoka. He still carries anger about her departure. But the Fives case provides a contrasting experience. When another person Anakin cares about is accused of instability and criminal behavior, the Council eventually listens to evidence instead of allowing the accusation to become the verdict. Anakin sees Mace admit that the Jedi missed something. He sees Shaak Tai defend Fives' personhood against Kaminoan claims. He sees Yoda authorize a dangerous investigation because a clone deserves to be heard. The Council is still flawed, but it no longer looks uniformly incapable of correcting itself. Padme sees the same change in Anakin. He is still intense, secretive, and afraid of losing people, but the chip crisis gives him a problem he can confront through action with people he trusts. He talks to Rex. He argues with Obi-Wan. He works with Padme to trace Senate authority. Instead of Palpatine becoming the only person who appears to understand his frustration, Anakin is surrounded by allies who validate the most important fear in front of him. Something is wrong with the Republic. That matters later, because Sidious' seduction depends not only on Anakin's fear for Padme, but on making himself the sole path to power, understanding, and control. Fives is unintentionally rebuilding the social bonds Sidious needs to break. The Senate investigation led by Padme, Bail, and Mon Mothma uncovers another layer of danger. Emergency military authority has expanded throughout the war through a series of legal measures that individually appeared temporary. Combined, they give the Chancellor extraordinary control over deployments, intelligence classification, and security directives. None of that proves Sith involvement, but it shows how easily the hidden clone order could be activated from the executive branch. Padme argues privately that even if Palpatine is innocent, no Chancellor should possess unchecked authority over a biologically compelled army. Bail agrees. They begin preparing legislation to transfer certain military emergency powers back to the Senate and establish independent oversight of the clone program. Sidious cannot allow that legislation to pass. He pressures allies to delay it, invokes the separatist threat, and uses fresh attacks to argue that weakening executive command in wartime would be suicidal. Normally, the Jedi would avoid direct involvement in a Senate fight. This time, Mace understands that constitutional authority and the chip conspiracy are the same battlefield. The Council quietly supports the oversight effort. Palpatine sees Jedi fingerprints behind the movement and realizes the crisis is now expanding beyond something he can solve by killing Fives. If he waits, he may lose both Order 66 and the legal powers needed to turn victory into Empire. Dooku becomes expendable earlier than in canon, but also more dangerous. He knows the clone army was part of Sidious' plan. He knows Tyrannus is now exposed. If captured alive, he could connect the conspiracy directly to Sidious. Palpatine therefore begins considering ways to remove him before the Jedi can take him. Dooku senses the shift. He has spent years believing he will stand beside his master after the Republic collapses. Yet the unraveling chip plot makes Sidious colder and more secretive. Dooku does not suddenly become sympathetic. but he becomes more cautious about placing himself where the Jedi could capture him, or Sidious could discard him. The Sith partnership begins to strain under pressure that never existed in canon. Grievous, unaware of the full political stakes, continues doing what he does best, creating terror and forcing Jedi into the field. His attacks become part of Sidious's attempt to keep the Council divided. But even those attacks produce unintended consequences because chipped clones serving under Jedi increasingly learn the truth during medical rotations. Every veteran saved is another witness. Every commander freed is another obstacle to a surprise purge. By the time the war approaches the stage that would normally lead into the Outer Rim sieges, the Grand Army is no longer a single hidden weapon. It is a patchwork. Large formations are chip-free. Others are partially cleared. Some rear echelon and Coruscant units remain compromised. Sidious can still cause enormous bloodshed, but he can no longer guarantee obedience across the galaxy. The Jedi Council now turns toward the question Fives raised in the warehouse but could not prove: the Chancellor himself. They review the circumstances of Fives' private meeting with Palpatine. Medical records confirm that Fives had been drugged before the audience. Security footage is incomplete in precisely the places that would show what happened inside the room. The Chancellor's account says Fives attacked him without provocation. Fives says Palpatine revealed enough to convince him that the plot reached the top. When Fives was merely an unstable fugitive, the Chancellor's word naturally carried more weight. Now that every major claim Fives made about the chips has been validated, his accusation cannot be dismissed. The Council does not know exactly what Palpatine said, but they know he had motive to discredit the witness. Mace asks a question that would have sounded treasonous months earlier. What if the Sith Lord they have been searching for is not merely influencing the Chancellor? What if the influence and the office are the same person? Yoda does not answer immediately. Obi-Wan is disturbed by the idea but cannot ignore the pattern. Palpatine has benefited from every stage of the war. He commands the army created through Tyrannus. He possesses the legal authority capable of activating emergency orders. He personally intervened in Fives' medical case. The dark side has surrounded the Chancellor for years. None of these facts alone proves he is Darth Sidious. Together, they justify surveillance. The Council begins watching Palpatine without telling Anakin at first, not because they distrust Anakin's loyalty, but because they know his friendship with the Chancellor makes the situation painful. Anakin notices anyway. This is where the alternate timeline could still go wrong. If Mace treats Anakin as a potential liability and shuts him out, Palpatine can exploit the insult. Obi-Wan argues against that approach. He points out that Anakin is already the person Palpatine is most likely to speak freely around. More importantly, Anakin deserves to know why his friend is under suspicion. The Council reluctantly brings him into the investigation and asks him not to spy as a subordinate, but to report anything concerning as a Jedi Knight. The distinction matters to Anakin. He is being trusted with the truth rather than ordered to deceive someone without explanation. Anakin is angry at first. Part of him still wants the investigation to end anywhere except Palpatine. The Chancellor has been in his life since he was a boy. He encouraged him when other Jedi criticized him. He listened to his frustrations. Suspecting Palpatine feels like suspecting a member of his own family. But then Anakin looks at Fives. The ARC trooper also trusted the Republic. Tup trusted the Republic. Rex trusted the Republic. Their loyalty did not make the hidden chip less real. Anakin realizes that refusing to investigate Palpatine because of affection would repeat the exact mistake everyone made when they refused to investigate the clones because of trust. He agrees. That choice is one of the first places where Fives saves Anakin without ever intending to. The clone's entire journey has been a lesson about trusting people without surrendering judgment. Fives loved his brothers enough to question what was happening to them. Rex believes in Anakin, but still demanded evidence. The Jedi can care about the Republic and investigate its leader. Anakin can care about Palpatine and still accept that Palpatine may be lying. Sidious has spent years teaching Anakin that love means possession and fear, that protecting someone requires controlling outcomes at any cost. Fives demonstrates the opposite. Loyalty can require questioning the person or institution you want to believe. Palpatine senses Anakin pulling away and accelerates his personal manipulation. He begins discussing mortality, the failures of the Jedi, and the limits of their teachings earlier than he otherwise might. He probes Anakin's fears about Padme, though at this stage the pregnancy crisis that will dominate Revenge of the Sith has not yet arrived. That timing is another enormous difference. Sidious is being forced to reveal pieces of his philosophical hand before Anakin is desperate enough to need them. Without visions of Padme dying driving him toward forbidden power, stories about transcending death sound less like salvation and more like an unsettling obsession. Anakin listens, but instead of hearing the only answer to his greatest fear, he hears a chancellor under investigation talking about powers the Jedi associate with the dark side. He reports the conversation to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan does not mock him or lecture him. He tells Anakin that Palpatine's interest in Sith knowledge is significant and asks him to be careful. Their exchange is calm, almost painfully ordinary, and that ordinariness is exactly what Sidious has spent years trying to prevent. Anakin has somewhere else to take his fear. He does not have to carry every secret alone. He still keeps his marriage to Padme hidden from the Council, but Padme herself is involved in the political investigation and knows how dangerous Palpatine's accumulation of power has become. The walls around Anakin are thinner. Sidious now faces a narrowing set of options. He can activate Order 66 before the Jedi remove more chips. He can attempt to assassinate the Council through conventional means. He can engineer a separatist attack on Coruscant and use the chaos to seize greater authority. Or he can reveal himself to Anakin and gamble that years of grooming are enough. None is as safe as the canon plan. Fives has transformed a perfect trap into a series of desperate bets. Sidious is still the most dangerous political strategist in the galaxy, but for the first time in years, he is reacting to someone else's timetable. The most likely desperate bet is a version of the Coruscant crisis brought forward and made more aggressive. Sidious needs a spectacular separatist assault that can do several things at once. Frighten the Senate into preserving his emergency powers, draw key Jedi away from the chip investigation, create confusion in the capital, and place Dooku in position for the transition from old apprentice to new. Grievous is ordered to threaten Coruscant. Dooku is given the familiar role of apparent captor. Palpatine expects Anakin and Obi-Wan to come for him, but the emotional context aboard the Separatist flagship is completely different from the one Sidious planned. Anakin and Obi-Wan still fight their way through droids and reach Dooku. The duel still proves how much Anakin has grown. He overwhelms Dooku, takes his hands, and stands over the defeated Sith Lord with blades at his throat. Palpatine tells him to kill Dooku. In canon, that command lands on years of frustration, anger, and grooming, and Anakin obeys, despite knowing it is not the Jedi way. Here Anakin freezes for a different reason. The man urging him to execute an unarmed prisoner is also the man under secret investigation for connections to the clone conspiracy. Dooku is not merely an enemy general, he is Tyrannus, the individual linked to the creation of the clone army. He may be the most important living witness in the Republic. Killing him would destroy evidence. Obi-Wan, conscious in this version or recovering quickly enough to speak, reinforces that Dooku must be taken alive. Palpatine pushes harder, saying Dooku is too dangerous and that the war can end immediately. That urgency exposes him. Anakin looks at the Chancellor and asks why he is so determined that Tyrannus never reached the Jedi Council. It is a simple question, but Dooku hears everything inside it. He looks from Anakin to Sidious and realizes the plan has changed. His master intended him to die. The promise that Dooku would help build a new order was always conditional. Sidious wants Skywalker. Dooku has known that on some level for years, but facing death makes the betrayal undeniable. Dooku laughs, not because the situation is amusing, but because the Sith habit of betrayal has finally closed around him. He tells Anakin that if the Jedi want to know who authorized the army, they should ask the man standing beside them. Palpatine immediately calls it a lie. Dooku does not need to say the words Darth Sidious yet. His reaction is enough to transform suspicion into crisis. Obi-Wan orders Anakin to secure Dooku. Palpatine's face remains controlled, but his options collapse. If he attacks now, he exposes himself. If he does nothing, Dooku reaches the temple alive. Sidious chooses patience for one more hour, hoping Grievous can create an escape opportunity during the battle. Dooku is transferred under extraordinary guard rather than delivered into ordinary Republic custody. Chip-cleared clone commandos accompany Jedi escorts. Fives is not present, but his fingerprints are on every precaution. The Council knows Dooku's testimony could be manipulated, so they do not accept his claims automatically. They ask for verifiable information. Dooku gives them names, channels, transactions, and details of the Sifo-Dyas operation that only Tyrannus could know. He confirms that the inhibitor chips were part of a contingency designed to turn the clone army against the Jedi. He confirms that the Sith have controlled both sides of the war. Finally, when Mace asks who Darth Sidious is, Dooku says the name Palpatine. The revelation is so enormous that even with months of suspicion, the Council struggles to absorb it. Palpatine is not a senator corrupted by the Sith. He is not a puppet being manipulated by someone close to him. He is the Sith Lord. The Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, the man who has directed the war, appointed generals, expanded executive power, and personally mentored Anakin Skywalker, is Darth Sidious. Dooku's testimony alone would not be sufficient for an arrest, especially because he is a captured enemy leader with every reason to lie. But the testimony now aligns with the chips, the Tyrannus connection, Five's account of the private meeting, the Chancellor's unusual knowledge of the investigation, the emergency order architecture, and years of dark side interference surrounding the executive office. The pieces finally form one picture. Mace refuses to wait for a Senate hearing. If Palpatine controls a biological command, capable of turning millions of soldiers into assassins, every minute gives him a chance to activate it. Yoda agrees that the Chancellor must be secured, though he insists the Jedi should preserve evidence and avoid appearing to seize government power. Bail and Padme are quietly informed that the Council possesses evidence of high treason tied to the creation of the clone army. They begin contacting senators who can maintain constitutional continuity if Palpatine is removed. The goal is not a Jedi coup. It is to prevent Sidious from turning an arrest into the coup narrative he has spent years preparing. Anakin demands to join the arrest team. Mace initially resists. Palpatine's relationship with Anakin is too close, and the danger is too great. Then Five's story once again changes the decision. The entire crisis began because institutions kept deciding what people could handle instead of trusting them with evidence. Obi-Wan argues that excluding Anakin now would hand Sidious exactly the emotional isolation he wants. Yoda agrees. Anakin knows the truth, has already resisted Palpatine's order to kill Dooku, and has more personal knowledge of the Chancellor than anyone. If the Jedi cannot trust him now, then all their talk about learning from their failures means nothing. Mace reluctantly allows Anakin to come, but makes one condition clear. They are going to arrest Palpatine, not execute him without necessity. The strike team is far more formidable than the group that enters Palpatine's office in canon. There is no assumption that they are confronting a politician who might surrender. They know he is a Sith Lord who has hidden in plain sight for years. Mace Windu leads. Yoda is present because the Jedi have not been dispersed into the final configuration Sidious wanted. Obi-Wan accompanies Anakin. Kit Fisto and other senior masters provide additional strength. A squad of chip-cleared clones secures the corridors, but is ordered not to enter the immediate duel unless necessary. Rex coordinates communications. Cody locks down military channels that could transmit emergency orders. Wolf alerts Plo Koon's forces. Across the galaxy, clone commanders who know the truth receive a coded warning. If any directive arrives ordering action against Jedi personnel, verify through independent command before obeying. Palpatine knows they are coming before the doors open. He has sensed the danger building through the Force, and Dooku's capture has confirmed that concealment is ending. There is no reason to maintain the mask once Mace enters with Yoda and Anakin beside him. The Chancellor asks whether the Jedi intend to overthrow the Republic. Mace states that Palpatine is under arrest for conspiracy with Count Dooku, unlawful manipulation of the Grand Army, and treason. Palpatine looks directly at Anakin and tells him the Jedi have finally shown their true nature. He says they are afraid of his power, afraid of the Senate, afraid of Anakin's potential. It is the same emotional weapon he would use later, but it arrives without the one thing that makes it irresistible. Anakin does not believe Palpatine is his only hope. The lightsaber comes out. Sidious is still terrifying. Preparation does not make him weak. He has spent decades mastering the dark side and hiding his abilities. The office erupts into violence. But this is not the canon duel where 4 Jedi walk into a trap, and 3 are cut down almost immediately before Mace is left alone. Yoda knows what Sidious is. Mace knows what Sidious is. Obi-Wan and Anakin know. They spread rather than crowding his first attack. Mace meets Sidious head-on. Yoda disrupts his movement with the Force. Obi-Wan takes the defensive role he excels at, denying escape routes. Anakin is forced to confront the impossible sight of the man he trusted, moving with the speed and hatred of a Sith. Sidious tries to turn the duel into a conversation with Anakin. He tells him the Jedi will never accept his marriage. He hints that he knows about Padme. He speaks of powers beyond death. He says the Council has used Anakin from the beginning. Some of it lands because some of it is true. Anakin has been deceived by the Jedi before. He is afraid of losing Padme, even without prophetic visions dominating him. He hates the idea that the Council might judge him for his attachments. But every time Sidious speaks, Anakin sees fives in the warehouse, begging someone to believe him. Palpatine was the person who tried to make that truth disappear. Whatever affection Anakin felt for the Chancellor cannot erase the bodies that Order 66 was designed to create. Outside the office, Sidious triggers his contingency. A coded command is transmitted through military channels. Execute Order 66. The order goes out earlier than he ever intended, in the middle of a Republic capital already on alert, with large sections of the army warned and many commanders chip-free. Across the galaxy, the response fractures. In units where the chip remains active and the command arrives cleanly, clone troopers turn on Jedi with horrifying speed. Some Jedi die. There is no version of this timeline where the discovery saves everyone, because millions of chips still exist and war has scattered the Order across thousands of positions. But in units led by cleared commanders, the reaction is immediate. Cody hears the command and feels nothing except disgust. He orders the 212th to stand down and arrest troopers whose chips activate violently. Wolf protects Plo Koon. Bly shields Isla Sakura instead of firing on her. Rex orders 501st formations to isolate affected personnel and jam secondary transmissions. The most important difference is communication. In canon, Jedi die because they have no warning, and because clone forces around them turn simultaneously. Here, the first attacked Jedi managed to transmit distress calls. Within moments, the Council's emergency network broadcasts confirmation that the hidden command has been activated. Every Jedi in the field is told to seek protection among cleared units, or withdraw from clone formations of unknown status. Clone medics receive emergency instructions to sedate affected brothers rather than kill them when possible. What Sidious intended as a synchronized decapitation becomes a chaotic series of mutinies, standoffs, and rescue operations. The Republic Army is tearing itself apart, but the Jedi Order is not exterminated. Inside the Chancellor's office, Anakin hears Rex's voice over the comm reporting that Order 66 has been issued from executive authority. That is the final proof. Palpatine did not merely know about the chips, he has activated them. Anakin's expression changes. Sidious can feel the possibility of corruption closing. He abandons persuasion and attacks Anakin directly, hoping rage will do what fear could not. Force lightning tears through the room. Yoda absorbs and redirects part of it. Mace drives Sidious backward. Obi-Wan is thrown across the chamber but survives. Anakin sees the lightning and understands that the Chancellor who claimed to protect the Republic has just ordered his soldiers to murder the Jedi. There is no moment where Anakin cuts off Mace's hand to save Sidious. Instead, when Sidious attempts to blast Mace at the critical instant, Anakin intercepts the attack. His lightsaber catches the lightning for a fraction of a second, giving Mace the opening to disarm Palpatine. Sidious hurls Anakin away with the Force and lunges for a concealed exit. Yoda blocks it. Obi-Wan rises. The 4 Jedi close around him. Sidious is still strong enough to make victory costly, but he is no longer fighting one master while emotionally controlling Anakin. The Chosen One has chosen. How Sidious dies or is captured depends on how literally we want to interpret the prophecy and how much risk the Jedi are willing to accept. The most plausible outcome is that Palpatine refuses arrest once his identity is exposed. A Sith Lord who has spent decades building the Grand Plan is not going to sit peacefully in a cell and trust the Senate to judge him. He attacks until lethal force becomes unavoidable. Mace and Yoda can defeat him together, but Anakin delivers the decisive interruption that prevents Sidious from escaping or killing one of them. Whether Anakin's blade strikes the final blow, or he creates the opening for Mace, his choice fulfills the spiritual core of his destiny. When offered the Sith path, he rejects it and helps destroy Darth Sidious. The instant Sidious falls, Order 66 does not simply vanish from every active chip. Troopers already compelled remain dangerous until the command state is interrupted, the chip removed, or the soldier physically restrained. That creates several brutal hours across the galaxy. Cleared clones fight to save their brothers from actions they cannot control. Jedi who know what is happening try not to slaughter men who are effectively victims. Some succeed, some cannot. Entire battalions have to be disarmed. Medical bays overflow with sedated troopers waiting for surgery. Ships change hands multiple times as chipped and unchipped officers struggle over command. The cost is terrible, but the difference from canon is fundamental. The conflict is recognized as an attack on both Jedi and clones, not a righteous army suppressing traitors. Fives is in the center of that response. He hears that Order 66 was real. For a moment, there is no satisfaction, only horror. Every nightmare he tried to prevent is happening in pieces. Then Rex contacts him and says the warning worked. Cody is alive and free. Wolf is free. Thousands of men are resisting the command. Jedi are evacuating from compromised fronts. Fives understands that success was never going to mean preventing Sidious from trying. Success means the attempt no longer happens in darkness. The clones know what is being done to them. The Jedi know who the enemy is. That knowledge is enough to change extermination into resistance. With Palpatine dead or captured and exposed, the Republic enters the most severe constitutional crisis in its history. The Supreme Chancellor was a Sith Lord. The leader of the Separatists was his apprentice. Both sides of the war were manipulated. The clone army was engineered with a secret command intended to massacre the Jedi. Billions of citizens who spent years choosing sides now learn that the conflict was shaped by one conspiracy at the top. There is anger at the Jedi for failing to detect it sooner, anger at the Senate for granting Palpatine so much power, anger at Kamino, anger at the military, an enormous fear that the Republic itself has become illegitimate. This is where Padme, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma become crucial. The Jedi cannot be the institution that defeats Palpatine and then simply takes control of the state. That would validate the story Sidious tried to tell. Mace therefore insists that emergency civil authority remain with the Senate. A temporary chancellery is established under constitutional procedure. Palpatine's emergency powers are suspended. Military command is divided among officers whose loyalty can be verified. The Jedi provide evidence and security, but publicly reject political rule. It is a messy transition, far less dramatic than declaring a galactic empire, but it preserves the possibility that the Republic can reform rather than merely exchange one unelected authority for another. Dooku's fate becomes a major part of ending the war. If he survives long enough to testify, he becomes the prosecution's most valuable and hated witness. He cannot claim innocence. He ordered massacres, trained dark side assassins, commanded the Separatist war machine, and helped construct the conspiracy. But he can identify Sidious agents, financial networks, and contingency plans. In exchange for nothing more than the possibility of avoiding immediate execution, Dooku provides access codes and names that allow Republic and Separatist leaders to verify the scale of Palpatine's manipulation. Some Separatist systems refuse to believe it. Others are furious to learn that their cause was controlled by the same man ruling the Republic they opposed. The war does not end in a single afternoon. Grievous remains at large and has no interest in reconciliation. Corporate leaders who profited from the conflict still possess armies. Some Separatist commanders continue fighting out of ideology, fear, or simple momentum. But the political heart of the conflict is gone. Without Sidious coordinating both sides, and without Dooku maintaining the Confederacy's cohesion, negotiations become possible in sectors where they were previously sabotaged. Padme can finally speak to Separatist senators without a Sith Lord engineering an assassination or bombing to destroy the talks. The Republic offers amnesty to systems willing to disarm and re-enter negotiations. Some demand genuine decentralization and reform. The end of the Clone Wars becomes a political process rather than a staged surrender, followed by dictatorship. Grievous likely becomes the final major military obstacle. Obi-Wan still has every reason to pursue him, but now the mission is not part of Sidious' plan to isolate Anakin on Coruscant. Chip-free clones accompany Obi-Wan openly. Cody stands beside him, knowing exactly what Order 66 was supposed to make him do. Their relationship changes in a way that is almost impossible to imagine in canon. Cody has to live with the knowledge that a device in his brain was designed to make him shoot Obi-Wan without hesitation. Obi-Wan has to live with the knowledge that, had Fives died unheard, Cody would have done it. Neither blames the other. If anything, their trust becomes more deliberate, because it has survived the revelation that someone tried to counterfeit it. When Grievous is eventually cornered, his death or capture removes the last figure capable of sustaining large-scale, separatist military resistance. The droid armies can be shut down sector by sector once command codes are seized from the remaining Council. The Clone Wars end without the Mustafar massacre, without Vader slaughtering separatist leaders, and without a newly declared Emperor presenting himself as the man who restored peace. The galaxy does not become peaceful overnight, but the machinery of perpetual war finally stops serving a hidden master. For the clones, peace creates a question the Republic has avoided since Geonosis. What happens to the soldiers when there is no war? In canon, the Empire rapidly replaces clones with conscripted stormtroopers, strips them of status, and allows many veterans to disappear into poverty or exploitation. In this timeline, Five's survival makes that outcome politically much harder. The clones have just been revealed as victims of illegal biological control. They also played a central role in resisting Order 66 once warned. Public hearings forced the Senate to confront whether men bred for service are citizens, property, or something in between. Fives refuses the language of property completely. Rex, Cody, Wolf, and Fives testify before the Senate. They describe what it means to know that obedience was engineered into them. They talk about brothers who died without names anyone outside the army remembered. They explain that removing the chips did not make them less loyal. It made their loyalty voluntary. Padme argues that the Republic cannot claim to have defeated a Sith conspiracy based on domination while continuing to deny clones control over their own lives. Bail supports citizenship and veterans' protections. There is opposition, especially from worlds that fear the cost of supporting millions of rapidly aging soldiers, but the moral logic is difficult to escape. The likely result is not perfect equality overnight. The Republic has deep structural problems, and the clones have been socially isolated from civilian life since birth. But the direction changes. Clones are granted legal personhood beyond military status. Service becomes voluntary after a transition period. Men who want to remain in a reformed defense force can do so. Others receive training, pensions, housing, and the right to choose occupations. Medical research begins into the effects of accelerated aging. Kamino's contractual ownership claims are rejected. For the first time, a clone can imagine a future that is not another battlefield. Fives becomes a symbol whether he wants to or not. The Senate calls him the soldier who exposed the conspiracy. Holonet reporters tell the story of the ARC trooper who defied doctors, generals, and the Chancellor because he believed his brother. Fives is uncomfortable with the mythology because he remembers how close he came to failing. He remembers Tup dying on Kamino. He remembers pointing a weapon in the warehouse. He remembers that Rex and Anakin could easily have dismissed him. He tells anyone who will listen that he did not save the Republic alone. Tup revealed the flaw. AZI-3 helped uncover it. Shaak Ti kept the Kaminoans from simply destroying the evidence. Rex listened. Anakin refused to let Fox kill him. Thousands of clones chose to remove the chips. The story is about brothers. Anakin's future is more complicated than simply saying he lives happily ever after. Fives exposing Order 66 removes the specific sequence that turns him into Darth Vader, but it does not erase the traits that made Sidious manipulation possible. Anakin is still terrified of losing people. He still struggles with anger and possessiveness. He still broke Jedi rules by marrying Padme in secret. He still slaughtered Tusken Raiders after his mother's death, something the Order does not know. Preventing his fall is not the same as solving his inner conflict. What changes is that Sidious no longer controls the environment in which those weaknesses are tested. When Padme eventually tells Anakin she is pregnant, There is no chancellor whispering that the dark side can save her. If Anakin still experiences visions of her death, he has more options. He can speak to Obi-Wan, he can speak to Yoda without Palpatine simultaneously feeding the fear. He can tell Padme the truth about what he is seeing, rather than treating her future as a secret problem he alone must control. Most importantly, he has just lived through proof that catastrophic visions and hidden threats should be investigated with trusted allies, not answered by surrendering moral judgment to a powerful mentor. Would Anakin confess his marriage to the Council? Possibly, especially after the war. The Jedi themselves would be facing a profound institutional reckoning. They were manipulated into becoming generals, failed Ahsoka, accepted a clone army without fully investigating its origins, and nearly died because they allowed wartime urgency to override fundamental questions. Yoda's spiritual journey near the end of the war already pushes him toward recognizing that the Jedi have been clouded and that victory cannot be measured simply through battlefield success. Surviving Sidious gives the Order an opportunity to reform rather than being destroyed before it can learn. Obi-Wan would be central to Anakin's personal survival. In canon, Anakin's fall is accelerated by Obi-Wan being away on Utapau, while Palpatine isolates him on Coruscant. Here the confrontation with Sidious happens before that separation can become decisive. Obi-Wan fights beside Anakin against the Sith Lord. He sees Anakin reject Palpatine. That shared experience creates a foundation for honesty. Anakin may still fear Obi-Wan's judgment, but it becomes harder to believe that Obi-Wan is merely an agent of a council that wants to hold him back. They have literally stood together while Sidious tried to turn them against each other. Ahsoka's relationship with Anakin also has a chance to heal in a healthier way. She does not automatically return to the Jedi Order. Her reasons for leaving were real, and saving the Order from Sidious does not erase how badly the Council handled her trial. But the fact that the Jedi listened to Fives and changed course may show her that the institution is capable of learning. More importantly, Anakin does not become Vader. When Ahsoka eventually reconnects with him, she finds her former master scarred by the war, but still himself. There is no confrontation on Malachor, no horrifying realization beneath a broken mask, and no decades-long guilt over whether she abandoned him to darkness. Rex's future changes even more dramatically. He does not have to fake his death after Order 66. He does not spend years hiding from the Empire with Wolf and Gregor on Selos because there is no Empire hunting him for treason. He can remain connected to Ahsoka, Fives, and the other clones openly. His role may evolve from battlefield captain into one of the leading voices for clone veterans. Rex has always believed service can be honorable when the cause and the commander deserve loyalty. The chip crisis forces him to redefine honor around choice. He can help build a defense force in which soldiers enlist rather than being manufactured for obedience. The Kaminoans face consequences as well. Lama Su and Nala Se would almost certainly be investigated for their role in concealing the implants. Their defense would be that they were fulfilling contractual obligations and following instructions they believed came from legitimate authorities connected to Sifo Dyas and Tyrannus. That may reduce personal culpability in some areas, but it cannot erase their willingness to suppress Tup's condition, manipulate Fives, and preserve a system that denied clones autonomy. The Republic could seize or place the cloning facilities under international oversight. Future cloning contracts would face restrictions unimaginable before the scandal. The Jedi Order also has to answer for its own role. Fives saving them does not mean the Council can pretend it did everything right. Senators ask why the Jedi accepted command of an army created in their name without understanding who paid for it. Clones ask why no one questioned the ethics of breeding soldiers for war. Ahsoka's departure becomes part of a larger discussion about institutional rigidity. Some masters resist the criticism, pointing out that the Republic would have fallen at Geonosis without the clone army. Others, especially Yoda, recognize that necessity became an excuse for complacency. The Order survived because one clone refused to accept the official explanation, and that fact should humble them. The post-war Jedi therefore likely withdraw from formal military command and return attention to peacekeeping, mediation, and spiritual training. They may reconsider attachment rules, the relationship between the Temple and the Senate, and the way young Jedi are prepared for political manipulation. Anakin becomes an uncomfortable but valuable figure in those debates. He embodies both the danger of attachment and the failure of pretending attachment can simply be denied. His love for Padme could have destroyed him under Sidious manipulation, yet his love for Rex, Fives, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan also helped him reject the Sith. The lesson is not that emotion is safe, it is that secrecy and fear make emotion easier to weaponize. There is something fitting about that. Sidious' greatest weakness in this timeline is not another Sith. It is not Yoda sensing his presence through the Force. It is not Mace Windu defeating him in a duel. All of those things matter at the end, but the collapse begins because Fives refuses to accept that Tup is defective property. Sidious understands ambition, fear, greed, and the desire for power. He understands how to manipulate Jedi arrogance and Senate corruption. What he underestimates is brotherhood among people he considers manufactured tools. That misunderstanding is built into the design of Order 66 itself. The plan assumes clone individuality is superficial. Give them names, friendships, and personalities if it improves combat performance. None of it matters once the chip activates. They can love their generals for 3 years because the biological command will override love in 1 second. Fives proves that individuality matters before the command is ever given. His loyalty to Tup drives him beyond the limits of his conditioning. Rex's loyalty to Fives makes him ask for evidence. Clone medics risk their careers to remove chips. Commanders conceal procedures from the government that legally owns their service because they recognize that obedience without choice is not loyalty. The Republic is saved by the very quality the cloning program treated as a defect. Clones became people who could question orders. From the perspective of Lama Su, independent thought made soldiers less efficient. From the perspective of Sidious, it was dangerous enough that a chip was necessary. From the perspective of Fives, independent thought is what makes a brother worth saving. That is why his story carries such weight even in canon. He dies without seeing whether anyone will remember what he discovered, yet the fragment of warning he leaves inside Rex eventually helps Ahsoka free him. In our timeline, that fragment becomes a galaxy-wide alarm. There would still be tragedy. Jedi die during the premature Order 66. Clones kill comrades while compelled. The Republic suffers political collapse and years of rebuilding. Separatist worlds do not immediately forgive Coruscant. Anakin does not become emotionally healthy overnight. The Jedi do not suddenly become perfect. A canonically grounded alternate timeline should preserve those costs because the Clone Wars have created wounds too deep for one revelation to heal. Fives does not wave a chip in front of the Council and create paradise. What he does is remove Sidious' ability to decide every outcome in advance. That distinction is the heart of the scenario. Palpatine's genius was never that he could defeat every opponent in a fair fight. His genius was arranging circumstances so that by the time anyone recognized the battle, the important choices had already been made. The Republic chose the clone army at Geonosis because there was no alternative. The Jedi became generals because the war had already begun. The Senate granted emergency powers because each crisis seemed temporary. Anakin turned to the dark side because Sidious waited until fear, secrecy, and isolation made every other option feel closed. Order 66 succeeded because the clones had no choice at all. Fives' survival reopens choices. The Council can investigate instead of dismissing him. Rex can remove his chip. Cody can decide whether Obi-Wan is his enemy. Padme can challenge emergency powers before the Empire exists. Dooku can be captured instead of executed to protect Sidious' secret. Anakin can look at Palpatine's offer without believing it is the only way to save the person he loves. The Senate can respond to treason without being presented with thousands of dead Jedi as proof of a coup. None of these choices guarantees a perfect future, but together they destroy the inevitability Sidious spent decades manufacturing. And at the center of all of it is CT-55555, a clone whose number literally repeats the same digit as though he were designed to be interchangeable, yet whose personality becomes impossible to replace. Fives begins as one member of Domino Squad, nearly fails training, survives because the squad learns to work together, and then spends the war repeatedly challenging systems that treat clones as expendable. On Umbara, he refuses orders that make no sense. On Kamino, he refuses a diagnosis that does not explain Tup. On Coruscant, he refuses to be silenced. Every stage of his life trains him for the moment when the entire galaxy needs one soldier to say that an order can be wrong. If Fives lives in that warehouse, his vindication also changes how the clones remember themselves after the war. In canon, Order 66 becomes a source of trauma, shame, and confusion. Some clones are absorbed into the Empire, some are discarded, and a handful like Rex spend years living with what almost happened. Here the army can tell a different story. They were built with chains inside their own brains, but one of their brothers found the chains and the others broke them. Their identity does not end with betrayal. It ends with emancipation. Fives himself would probably hate being called the savior of the Republic. He would point toward Tup first. Tup's malfunction exposed the flaw. He would point toward AZI-3, the droid who kept testing when the official doctors wanted answers buried. He would point toward Shaak-Ti, who insisted clones were more than Kaminoan property. He would point toward Rex, because believing a frightened brother in a warehouse required courage of a different kind. He would point toward Anakin, because refusing Palpatine's final manipulation prevented the Sith from turning a partial military disaster into total dictatorship. That humility makes the title fit even more. Because Fives does save the Republic, just not through some impossible act of individual strength. He saves it by making the truth impossible to ignore. Once the chip is seen, everything connected to it can be questioned. Once Tyrannus is investigated, Dooku's role can be exposed. Once Dooku is connected to both armies, Palpatine's position becomes suspicious. Once Palpatine is investigated before Anakin is isolated and desperate, the Sith Lord loses his greatest weapon. The chain is long, but the first link is a clone trooper asking why his brother killed a Jedi. And that is what makes this alternate history so devastating when we compare it with canon. Fives was not years away from the truth. He was not missing some impossible piece of Sith lore. He was hours away from creating exactly this crisis. The physical evidence existed. AZI-3 existed. Rex was close enough to believe him that years later, under the full compulsion of Order 66, some part of him still managed to tell Ahsoka to find Fives. The Jedi later discovered that Dooku was Tyrannus. They later learned enough pieces of the Sifo-Dyas mystery to understand the Sith were involved in the clone army. All the components were there. Sidious won because those discoveries happened separately, too late, and without Fives alive to connect them. Change one blaster bolt in a Coruscant warehouse and the structure can reverse. Fox does not kill Fives. Anakin and Rex see the chip. The Council verifies it. Commanders remove it. The Kaminoan story collapses. Tyrannus becomes the center of the Sifo-Dyas investigation. Dooku is captured alive. Palpatine is exposed before he can transform Anakin's fear into obedience. Order 66 is triggered into an army already learning how to resist it. Jedi and clones survive together. The Republic faces its corruption instead of becoming the Empire. The greatest victory is Anakin's because it changes the meaning of the Chosen One prophecy, without requiring him to spend decades as Darth Vader first. He still has to choose. Destiny does not remove that requirement. Sidious still offers power. Fear still exists. Anger still exists. The Jedi are still imperfect. But Anakin reaches the choice with friends around him instead of corpses, with evidence instead of lies, and with enough trust to believe there is another path. When Palpatine orders the clones to kill the Jedi, Anakin sees exactly what the Sith vision of order means. Every relationship reduced to control, every person turned into an instrument, every fear used as a chain. He rejects it. Fives never had the Force. He never sat on the Jedi Council. He never commanded a sector army or held a Senate seat. He was born because the Republic needed soldiers and raised to believe his highest purpose was following orders. Yet the act that changes history is his refusal to stop thinking when the people above him tell him to. That is why this version of Fives becomes more than a war hero. He becomes the person who proves that free will can defeat a plan built on obedience. So if Fives successfully exposed the inhibitor chips to the Jedi Council, Order 66 would not simply disappear. Sidious would fight desperately to preserve it. The war would become more chaotic before it became safer. Jedi and clones would still die, but Palpatine's perfect endgame would be broken months before he was ready. The clone army would cease to be a guaranteed weapon against its generals. The investigation into Sifo-Dyas would accelerate toward Tyrannus. Dooku would become a liability instead of a disposable corpse, And Anakin Skywalker would confront the truth about Palpatine before fear for Padme could trap him into becoming Darth Vader. Fives would do what almost no one else in the entire Clone Wars managed to do: force Darth Sidious to react. And in a war where Sidious won by controlling every side, forcing him to react might have been enough to save the galaxy. Thanks for watching. If you have another Clone Wars what if, character decision, battle, or alternate timeline you want us to explore, leave the idea in the comments below. Until the next video, may the Force be with you.